Jag vill tacka livet som gett mig sång. Det gav mig 2 ögon och när jag dem öppnar kan jag klart urskilja det svarta från det vita. Och högt där uppe himlens mantel strödd med stjärnor. Bland mängder människor den som jag älskar.
Das letzte Bild von Olof Palme. Aufgenommen am letzten Tag seines Lebens. Am 28. Februar 86 um 3:30 ist der Fotograf Jon Wallberge ins Arbeitszimmer des Ministerpräsidenten bestellt.
Ja, sen så sa vi adjö.
Ja, dann haben wir Tschüss gesagt mit einem Händedruck. Und dann sagte er, ich habe auf der Liste gesehen von denen, die damit nach Moskau fahren, da bist du auch drauf. Ja, stimmt, habe ich gesagt. Na, dann sehen wir uns in Moskau, wenn nicht vorher. Und dann sagten wir Tschüss.
Und wie war seine Laune?
Ja, er hatte sehr gute Laune, lachte und war richtig ausgelassen.
Rosenbad, Schwedens Regierungszentrale, ist in Freitagslaune. Olof Palme hat eines seiner wenigen freien Wochenenden. Um 17:30 Uhr macht er sich allein zu Fuß auf den Weg in seine Altstadtwohnung nach Gamla Stan, wie meistens. Die Berührung mit Menschen hat Palme nie gescheut. Personenschutz mag er nicht. Der enge ihn nur ein. Wer wollte, dem hat er seine Vorstellung des demokratischen Sozialismus erklärt. Und er, der Tür an Tür mit den Stockholmern wohnte, hat sie hier und da auch durchgesetzt.
Sein besonderes Charisma hat die Menschen beeindruckt, aber auch polarisiert. Nur wenigen war er gleichgültig, viele haben ihn geliebt, aber manche haben ihn eben auch von ganzem Herzen gehasst. Ob Kreml oder Weißes Haus, Palme scheute keine Konflikte. Auch seine Vietnamkritik traf. Es war seine Ausstrahlung und die Art, wie er es sagte, wenn er die Bomben auf vietnamesische Städte oder Dörfer in eine Reihe mit den schlimmsten Verbrechen der Menschheit stellte. Ein engagierter Kämpfer für die dritte Welt. Gute Beziehungen zu Ortega, Castro und Arafat. Durch seine Haltung machte sich Palme viele Freunde, aber auch erbitterte Feinde. So wird es eine Vielzahl von Spekulationen geben, wer hinter dem Mord stehen könnte. Mal ist es die CIA oder der KGB, lange Zeit sind es die Kurden, zwischendurch wieder verschiedene rechtsextreme internationale Kreise, dann wieder der iranische Geheimdienst, Apartheid-Anhänger aus Südafrika oder, und das wäre den Fahndern offenbar am liebsten, ein nicht politisch motivierter Einzeltäter. Und es gibt noch eine Spur, die mehr Hinweise liefert als jede andere.
Der Abend bricht an. Die Palmes wollen ins Kino. Mit der U-Bahn und ohne Leibwächter. Um 8:30 gehen sie los, gerade als Ulla Strömbäck zur Arbeit will.
Och när jag kom precis här så hörde jag
Und als ich genau hierhin kam, hörte ich was, was so klang, als ob einer runtersprang. Von da. Und da kommt ein Mann von dem Zaun da und ich gucke ihm nach. Und er geht über die Straße hinter meinem Rücken und stellt sich an die Tür da. Ich dachte, warum steht er denn da?
Nur 20 Meter entfernt gehen die Palmes zum Fahrkartenschalter.
Das rauschte um ihn und da hat der Mann irgendwas in die Hand genommen, das war ein Walkie-Talkie, und fing an reinzusprechen.
Walkie-Talkie-Männer werden auch vor Palmes Haus gesehen. Und es gibt noch mehr. Kurz bevor die Palmes den Bahnsteig von Gamla Stan betreten, wird ein Mann beobachtet, der in ein Walkie-Talkie spricht. Er trägt es unter der Jacke. Der Fahrkartenverkäufer beobachtet jemanden, der den Eindruck macht, als verfolge er die Palmes. Und der Zugführer sieht zwei Männer. Sie folgen den Palmes in den Waggon. Als der Zug schließlich den Bahnhof verlässt, hat es mindestens 9 solcher ungewöhnlichen Beobachtungen gegeben. Das Kino Grand liegt am Sveavägen, in der Mitte zwischen der 2. und 3. Station. Aus der Umgebung der 2. U-Bahn-Station werden später 4 Hinweise über Walkie-Talkie-Männer kommen. Palmes aber fahren bis zur 3. Station, Rotmansgatan. Dem Zugführer fällt auf, dass dieselben Männer, die Palmes in den Waggon gefolgt waren, hier ebenfalls aussteigen. Egal welchen Weg der Ministerpräsident genommen hätte, er wäre offensichtlich immer unter Beobachtung gewesen, auch als er in der Kinoschlange steht, auch während der Vorstellung.
– 23:10 Uhr. Der Film ist zu Ende, Palmes wollen zu Fuß nach Hause. Nicht weit vom Kino wundert sich Sunniva Telestam, dass ein Polizist nicht das Funksprechgerät, sondern ein Walkie-Talkie benutzt. Komisch, denkt sie sich und merkt sich die letzten 3 Ziffern der Streife. 520. Dann hört sie die Worte, aha, dort drüben. Und der Wagen fährt, ja, rast davon. – 23:17 Uhr. Ein Block weiter. Der Zeuge Jerka spaziert gerade mit seiner Freundin zum Sveavägen. Da sieht er gegenüber am Friedhofszaun, hier nachgestellt, ein bekanntes Gesicht. Wir nennen den Mann Thomas Lind. Er ist Polizist. Mit Walkie-Talkie in der Hand beobachtet Lind die Straßenecke Sveavägen. Als Olof Palme vorbeikommt, ist es genau 23:18 Uhr. Palme wechselt die Straßenseite, seine Frau will in ein Boutique-Schaufenster gucken. 200 Meter Luftlinie östlich will der Zeuge Christian gerade nach Hause. 2 Walkie-Talkie-Männer sehen in ein leeres Schaufenster. Niemand sonst ist auf der Straße. Christian empfindet die Situation als bedrohlich. Er ruft später die Polizei an. Dort sagt man ihm nicht, dass einer der beiden Polizist ist. Stattdessen wird Christian bald darauf mit Drohanrufen belästigt.
23:20 Uhr. Die Palmes setzen ihren Heimweg auf dem Sveavägen fort. Es sind die letzten Meter, die Olof Palme gehen wird. An der Ecke Tunnelgatan kommt er am Farbengeschäft Dekorima vorbei. Schon seit etwa 3 Minuten wartet ein Mann im Ladeneingang. Es ist genau 23:21 Uhr. Palme ist gerade vorbei, seine Frau Lisbeth 2 Schritte weiter. Da tritt der Mann heraus und schießt zweimal. Palmes Hauptschlagader wird getroffen. Olof Palme ist sofort tot.
Ich heiße Gösta Söderström und bin mittlerweile ein pensionierter Polizeikommissar. Ich war der Einsatzleiter hier, als Olof Palme ermordet wurde. Mein Funkwagen stand da und hier lag Olof Palme. Um ihn herum standen etwa 10 bis 12 Personen. 2 Personen versuchten ihn wiederzubeleben. Sie beatmeten ihn künstlich und massierten das Herz. Unter diesen Leuten hier war ein Mann, der schrie und zeigte. Da läuft er lang.
Der Mörder flieht die 89 Stufen hoch zur Malmskillnadsgatan. Ein Zeuge rennt hinterher. In der David Bagaras Gata aber verliert er die Spur. Die Straße ist menschenleer. Plötzlich kommen ihm Scheinwerfer entgegen. Eine Polizeistreife fährt langsam vorbei, ohne Blaulicht, ohne anzuhalten. Später wird sich herausstellen, dass auch die Nummer dieser Streife mit den Ziffern 520 endet. Drei Minuten nach den Schüssen. Der Pressefotograf Orke Malmström hört regelmäßig Polizeifunk, um schnell vor Ort zu sein. Durch seinen automatischen Sendersuchlauf gerät er zufällig in ein Walkie-Talkie-Gespräch.
Und als ich mich ins Auto setzte, habe ich wie immer mein Telefon und mein Funkgerät eingeschaltet. Und da habe ich dieses Gespräch gehört. Hallo da oben, wie ist es? Abscheulich kalt, antwortet eine andere Stimme. Dann wieder die erste, der Ministerpräsident ist erschossen. Und dann war überhaupt kein Ton mehr. Nichts mehr.
Sprechfunk spielt in dieser Nacht eine wichtige Rolle. So werden weitere Walkie-Talkie-Männer gesehen, 2 sogar mit Blickkontakt zum Tatort. Seit Olof Palme das Kino verlassen hat, werden in der Umgebung des Tatortes mehr als 1 Dutzend Beobachtungen gemacht. Auch der nachweisbare Fluchtweg des Mörders endet innerhalb dieses Zirkels von Walkie-Talkie-Männern.
Um 23:25 Uhr, 500 Meter vom Tatort, nähert sich der 43er Autobus der Haltestelle Eriksbergsgata. 2 abgehetzt wirkende Männer warten schon. Ihr Verhalten ist sehr auffällig. Später werden sich ein Fahrgast und der Busfahrer an die beiden erinnern. Es sind der Polizist Thomas Lind und ein Kollege, Nils Holm nennen wir ihn. Derselbe Thomas Lind, den Jerka 7 Minuten zuvor am Sveavägen gesehen hatte. Die beiden gehörten Anfang der 80er Jahre zur sogenannten Baseball-Liga, eine Spezialeinheit gegen Straßenkriminalität. Die meisten Mitglieder stehen politisch am äußersten rechten Rand. Wenn es um Anzeigen wegen polizeilicher Brutalität geht, gehören Lind und Holm zu den Spitzenreitern. Urteile aber gibt es selten. Der öffentliche Druck gegen die Baseball-Liga wächst. Der Journalist Ole Minell hat den Werdegang der Baseball-Liga und ihrer Mitglieder von Anfang an aufgezeichnet und analysiert.
1983 war man gezwungen, diese Gruppe umzubilden. Man konnte die nicht mehr länger halten. Sie war zu auffällig geworden. Und da wurde die normalen Polizei umorganisiert. Da wurde eine A-Schicht und eine B-Schicht gebildet. Und darin sind die Baseball-Polizisten aufgegangen.
Die Norrmalmwache gehört zum wichtigen Stockholmer Bezirk Norrmalm mit der Regierungskanzlei. Ausgerechnet hierhin wechselten die wenigen rechtsradikalen Polizisten, die es in Schweden gab. Die Mehrheit der Polizei war eher sozialdemokratisch orientiert.
Anfang der 80er Jahre verschmolzen die älteren Rechtsextremisten der Stockholm-Polizei mit den jüngeren, den Gewalttätigen. Dieser Kern, der sich da gebildet hat, arrangiert sogenannte Kameradschaftsfeste. Dabei werden politisch rechtsextreme Vorträge gehalten, von Gastrednern mit nationalsozialistischen Anschauungen. Und da wird deutsche Marschmusik gespielt und Stiefeltrampeln, wie man auf Schwedisch sagt.
Auch der Hitlergruß war üblich. Wenige Stunden nach dem Attentat feiert die A-Schicht von der normalen Polizei ein Fest. Der Schichtleiter, so berichten Zeugen später, spricht einen Toast auf den Palme-Mord. Keiner distanziert sich. Der Schichtleiter selbst sagt, er habe nur auf die gute Arbeit seiner A-Schicht in der Mordnacht angestoßen. Gegen den Schichtleiter oder andere wird nicht ermittelt. Das Fest sei Privatsache gewesen, heißt es.
Am Morgen nach der Tat macht sich der Stockholmer Polizeichef Hans Holmér selbst zum Fahndungsleiter. Er hat die Baseballliga gegründet und umgibt sich gerne mit deren Mitgliedern. Holmér rüstet sie mit Maschinenpistolen aus, deren Besitz in Schweden illegal ist. Sie wurden extra eingeschmuggelt. Seinen Fahndungsraum lässt sich Holmér mit schusssicherem Glas ausstatten, an allen zuständigen Stellen vorbei. Alles, was Holmér braucht, das Glas, die Maschinenpistolen und auch Walkie-Talkie-Geräte, hat er sich bei diesem Mann besorgt. Wir nennen ihn PG Karlström, Polizist, später Waffenhändler, rechtsradikal. Von ihm gibt es zahlreiche Fotos mit Hitlergruß, unter anderem vor dem Brandenburger Tor in Berlin. In seiner Waffensammlung findet sich der Kugeltyp, mit dem Olof Palme erschossen wurde. Kurz zuvor am Blinddarm operiert, verlässt Karlström noch am Mordtag dieses Krankenhaus gegen ärztlichen Rat. In der Mordnacht hat er mindestens 2-mal Kontakt zu einem Walkie-Talkie-Mann. In einer internen Aktennotiz der Fahndungsleitung heißt es, Karlström sei gefühllos, gleichgültig und durchaus fähig zu morden. Ein Büro seiner Firma liegt in diesem Eckhaus am Fluchtweg des Mörders. Hier, an dieser Stelle, glaubt der hinterherlaufende Zeuge, den Mörder zum letzten Mal gesehen zu haben. Der zuständige Staatsanwalt sagt 1994, PG Karlström habe für die Tatzeit kein Alibi. Ermittelt gegen ihn wird aber nicht, weil er ja zur Tatzeit eigentlich im Krankenhaus hätte liegen müssen.
Das Haus gegenüber. Auch hier standen 2 Walkie-Talkie-Männer. Hier wohnt ein Geschäftsfreund von Karlström. Mit ihm zusammen ist er Mitglied im sogenannten Verteidigungsschießverein. Björn Skogsfeld nennen wir ihn. Polizist, Schießlehrer, ebenfalls rechtsextrem. Schwärmt von Chiles Junta. Am Mordabend sitzt er im Mannschaftswagen 3230. Der gehört eigentlich nicht in den normalen Bezirk. Trotzdem hält er sich dort zur Tatzeit auf, wie er sagt, weil er seinen falsch geparkten Privatwagen wegfahren will. Er stellt aber sein Auto nur von einem Parkverbot in ein anderes. Sein Mannschaftswagen 3230 wartet währenddessen auf dem Fluchtweg am oberen Treppenabsatz mit gutem Blick auf den Tatort. Genau hinter Skogsfelds Auto hat der hinterherlaufende Zeuge den Mörder zum letzten Mal gesehen. Etwa zu der Zeit, als die Schüsse fallen, steigt Skogsfeld in seinen Mannschaftswagen und fährt davon.
Merkwürdig auch die Geschichte mit den Kugeln. Eine Kugel wird erst 37 Stunden nach dem Mord gefunden. Sie lag hier an dem großen Pfeiler, nur ganze 4 Meter von der Blutlache entfernt. Auch die zweite Kugel halten mitsuchende Polizeitechniker für nachträglich abgelegt. Beide Kugeln treffen in gewaschenem Zustand im Labor ein. Das ist das Informationspapier der Fahndungsleitung. So soll es gewesen sein. 23:23 Uhr, der erste Alarm. 10 Sekunden später der erste Polizeiwagen vor Ort. Das aber widerspricht der Aussage von Leif Lundqvist. Mit seinem Wagen gerade auf dem Sveawegen ruft er kurz nach den Schüssen die Alarmzentrale an. Die soll ihn mit der Polizei verbinden.
1 minut. 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 1
80 Sekunden hängt Lundqvist in der Leitung. Kurz bevor die Polizei sich meldet, wird das Gespräch offenbar von dritter Seite unterbrochen. Der Sicherheitschef für den Telefon- und Walkie-Talkie-Funkverkehr der Polizei hat zusammen mit Karlström das Büro direkt am Fluchtweg des Mörders gemietet. Auch von ihm gibt es Hitler-Grußbilder, auch er ist im Verteidigungsschießverein.
In der Polizeifunkzentrale sitzt am Mordabend ein Mann, den wir Hans Zetterlund nennen. Ausnahmsweise. Normalerweise gehört er in den Mannschaftswagen 3230, der kurz vor dem Mord auf dem Fluchtweg wartete. Auch er gehört zum Verteidigungsschießverein. Alarmzentralanrufe haben erste Priorität, aber Zetterlund kümmert es nicht. Er nimmt nicht den Ruf vom Tatort, sondern den einer Taxizentrale an. Und als auch die von Schüssen berichtet, legt er wieder auf. Und Hans Zetterlund tut noch mehr, um den Mord möglichst geheim zu halten. Die Brüder Kari und Pertti Putjainen, zwei Informatiker, haben die Merkwürdigkeiten in der Funkzentrale untersucht und dabei auch mit Hans Zetterlund gesprochen.
Und dann alarmiert er auch keinen Krankenwagen, obwohl er weiß, dass ein Mann erschossen wurde. Führt kein Protokoll, obwohl er es muss, und informiert nicht den Schichtleiter.
Die Alarmzentrale wundert sich, dass die Polizei noch keinen Krankenwagen bestellt hat. Die Rückfrage bei der Polizei wird aufgezeichnet.
Wisst ihr denn noch nicht Bescheid? Nein, wir sind noch nicht angerufen worden, heißt es. Obwohl genau das vor 2 Minuten geschehen war und die ersten Polizisten doch laut Protokoll schon längst am Tatort waren.
Und die Polizei tut immer noch nichts. Sie gibt zwar endlich Großalarm, aber der gilt nur einem etwas schlingernd fahrenden Volvo. Bei Verbrechen mit Schusswaffen muss Alarmstufe 1 gegeben werden, ständig wiederholt und ergänzt. Das genau aber passiert nicht. Der Mord am Sveavägen bekommt von Zetterlund die niedrigstmögliche von 3 Alarmstufen.
Und dieser Alarm, der an die Streifen geht, der muss ja wiederholt werden. Für alle die, die den ersten nicht gehört haben oder ihr Funkgerät nicht anhaben. Und er wird eben nicht wiederholt. Und man geht dann sofort auf einen besonderen Kanal, sodass nur alle Streifen, die den ersten Alarm gehört haben, von dem Mord wissen. Das heißt, die meisten Streifen, die in der Innenstadt rumfahren, wissen gar nichts von der Sache mit dem Ministerpräsidenten. Ganz zu schweigen von den benachbarten Polizeidistrikten. Zollner zum Beispiel, 2 Kilometer vom Tatort. Da weiß man erstmal überhaupt nichts.
Eine Mördersuche wird nicht organisiert, Reichsalarm mit stundenlanger Verspätung gegeben. Bus- und Taxifahrer wissen mehr als die meisten Polizeistreifen. Die Polizeizentrale gibt kaum Anweisungen. Gegen jede Vorschrift bearbeiten nur 2 Telefonisten diesen Mord. Die anderen 8 beschäftigen sich seelenruhig mit Kleinkriminalität. Zeitmanipulationen werden auch vom ersten Polizisten am Tatort bestätigt.
Ich nehme das auf meinen Eid und schwöre auf die Bibel, dass ich um 23:30 Uhr hier war. Aber offiziell sagt man, ich war um 23:23 Uhr hier. Und das ist eine Sache, die mich seit Jahren beschäftigt. Und heute glaube ich beweisen zu können, dass ich Recht habe und dass die offizielle Zeit falsch ist.
Mit kräftiger Verzögerung wird dieses Einsatzprotokoll präsentiert. Wagen 3230 wird angeblich um 23:23 Uhr alarmiert und ist Sekunden später am Tatort. Das hieße runde 7 Minuten früher als Gösta Söderström, dem die Polizeifunkzentrale andererseits nicht abspricht, der erste Polizist am Tatort gewesen zu sein. Ein deutlicher Widerspruch.
Es war so viel geheim in der Sache. Und dann wollte ich mein handgeschriebenes Protokoll sehen, das ich selbst in der Mordnacht geschrieben habe. Aber das durfte ich nicht. Und auch kein anderer. Dagegen hat man mir ein maschinengeschriebenes Protokoll gezeigt, wo drin stand, dass um 23:23 Uhr nicht weniger als 14 Autos alarmiert wurden. Und das ist ja nun überhaupt nicht wahr.
Noch ein Widerspruch. Merkwürdig auch die Kontrollliste, die inzwischen vernichtet ist. Hier eine Kopie. Um 23:23 Uhr will HZ, das Kürzel für Jan Zetterlund, die ersten Wagen losgeschickt haben. Aber jedes HZ hat ein Sternchen.
Wenn eine Alarmzeit mehr als 7 Minuten von der Computeruhr in der Polizeizentrale abweicht, dann setzt der Computer automatisch ein Sternchen.
Will man den Alarm vorverlegen? Will man vertuschen, dass der Mörder 7 Minuten Vorsprung bekam? Oder dass es neben dem offiziellen Funksprechverkehr einen speziellen Walkie-Talkie-Sonderkanal gab? Die Worte, der Ministerpräsident ist erschossen, hört der Pressefotograf Orke Malmström zufällig genau auf diesem Walkie-Talkie-Kanal. An den Gesprächen auf diesem Kanal ist nachweislich mindestens ein Handfunk-Sprechgerät der Polizei beteiligt. Wer zu diesem Zeitpunkt das Gerät bedient, ist bis heute ungeklärt.
Auch die Streife mit der Endziffer 520 unter dem Fenster der Zeugin Suniva Telestam benutzt offenbar den Walkie-Talkie-Kanal. Die richtige Nummer der Streife ist mit großer Sicherheit die 1520. Das ist die Streife, die der hinterherlaufende Zeuge bei der Verfolgung sieht und später anhält. Er fragt die Polizisten, ob sie auch den Mörder suchen. Die sagen ja, obwohl sie zu diesem Zeitpunkt durch den offiziellen Polizeifunk vom Mord noch gar nichts wissen können. Der Fahrer der Streife gehört auch zum Kreis der rechten Gesinnungsgenossen. Eine Gegenüberstellung von Polizisten mit einem der zahlreichen Zeugen der Mordnacht hat es nie gegeben.
Verantwortlich dafür, wie man mit der Polizeispur umgeht, ist der Geheimdienst SEPO, die Sicherheitspolizei. Mit Gestapo-Hilfe aus Deutschland in den 40er Jahren aufgebaut, oft wegen ihrer Rechtslastigkeit kritisiert. Viele SEPO-Leute haben ihren Palme-Hass nie bestritten. SEPO-Chef in den 70er Jahren war Hans Holmér, der Gründer der Baseball-Liga. Vieles deutet darauf hin, dass die SEPO bereits vor dem Mord von den Attentatsplänen hier am Sveawegen zumindest wusste. Die Polizisten jedenfalls werden vor der Polizeispur geschützt. Zeugen werden von Journalisten und nicht von Fahndern aufgespürt. Diese Zeugen werden nicht ernst genommen, eingeschüchtert oder gar bedroht. Die meisten haben auch heute noch Angst.
Eine Minute vor dem Mord. Zum Kamerainterview sind auch die beiden Zeuginnen nicht bereit, die dem Mörder kurz vor der Tat begegnet sind. Wir nennen sie Katja und Pirjo. Sie haben ihre Geschichte dem Journalisten Ole Alsen erzählt.
Katja und Pirjo har varit på bio på Kungsgatan.
Katja und Pirjo waren im Kino auf der Kungsgatan, kommen hier lang. Katja fragt Pirjo, wie spät es ist. Pirjo hat ihre Uhr vergessen. Katja wendet sich an einen Mann, der da steht. Und gerade als sie ihn fragen will, wie spät es ist, da erkennt sie ihn. Er ist ein Finne aus einem Fitnessstudio in Upplands Väsby. Und deshalb fragt sie auch gleich auf Finnisch, wie spät ist es? Der Mann sieht erschrocken aus und antwortet nicht. Da rüttelt sie ihn am Ärmel und fragt, warum kannst du mir nicht sagen, wie spät es ist? Der Mann steht so da, mit gekreuzten Armen. Und dann hört man einen Ton. Dann hebt er den Arm ein bisschen und dann sieht sie, dass er ein Walkie-Talkie in der rechten Hand hat. Und als der Arm oben ist, sieht sie unter dem anderen Arm eine Waffe. Im Walkie-Talkie sagt einer, nun kommen Sie. Der Mann antwortet auf Finnisch, ich bin erkannt worden, was soll ich machen? Und da kommt es wieder aus dem Walkie-Talkie, scheiß drauf und tu, was du sollst. Die Mädchen sind verwirrt und aufgeregt, begreifen nicht, worum es sich handelt und gehen davon.
Wer war die finnische Stimme aus dem Walkie-Talkie? Katja und Pirjo sind schon 2 Ecken weiter an der Kungsgatan. Da hören sie es knallen. Sie drehen sich um, sehen aber nichts mehr. Ihnen ist unheimlich und sie beeilen sich, zum Bahnhof zu kommen. Mit dem Vorortzug fahren sie nach Hause in den Stadtteil Upplands Väsby. Dort erfahren sie am nächsten Morgen, was sich am Sveavägen abgespielt hat. Hier draußen lag damals das Fitnessstudio Väsby Atletklub, Treffpunkt vieler Finnen.
Hier war's. Hier hat sie den Mann gesehen, den sie später vor Dekorima wiedererkannt hat, am Abend, als Palme erschossen wurde. Er fiel ihr auf, weil er sich komisch aufführte. Kam hier manchmal reingelaufen und alberte rum mit einigen von den Finnen, die hier waren. Hat Radau gemacht und nie trainiert.
Seine rassistischen Äußerungen sind ihr noch in Erinnerung. Seinen Namen kann oder will Katja nicht nennen. Im Fitnessstudio, das inzwischen eine andere Adresse hat, war er ein bekanntes Gesicht.
Aber es gibt viele, die hier trainiert haben, die sagen, das wissen doch wohl alle, wer der Mann ist, der hier rumgelaufen ist. Trotzdem behauptet die Polizei nach wie vor, dass es ihr nicht geglückt ist, den Mann zu identifizieren. Ich habe meine Zweifel daran. Ich glaube, man hat. Aber aus irgendeinem Grund darf das nicht rauskommen, bis auf Weiteres.
Am längsten hat Hans Ölvebro die Fahndungsgruppe geführt. 9 Jahre lang. Seine Ausgangsannahme hieß, wir arbeiten unvoreingenommen mit einer Reihe denkbarer Motive. Die einzige Spur allerdings, mit der zu befassen ich mich weigere, ist die Polizeispur.
Zu dieser Zeit war es so, dass wir unvoreingenommen herangegangen sind, weil wir noch nicht alle Angaben bearbeitet hatten. Aber wir sind inzwischen so weit gekommen, dass wir mit unserer Analyse sagen können, es hat keine Verschwörung gegeben. Was die Polizeispur angeht, so gab es ja die ganze Zeit rabiate Verfolgungen von Polizisten. Und das waren ja unbegründete Behauptungen, die nicht mit der Wirklichkeit übereinstimmten.
Wie aber erklärt sich dann das merkwürdige Verhalten der Polizisten in der Mordnacht und die Manipulationen in der Funkzentrale?
Ich soll nicht untersuchen, wie Polizisten aufgetreten sind. Ich soll Olof Palmes Mörder festnehmen.
Einen Zusammenhang zwischen dem Olof Palme-Mord und seinen Polizisten sieht er nicht?
So wie Schweden eine gute Demokratie ist, so haben wir eine gute Polizei, die auch demokratisch ist. Die halbe Polizei ist sozialdemokratisch. Glaubst du, dass wir, die wir demokratisch sind, unseren Ministerpräsidenten ermorden würden? Wir sind doch da, um die Gesellschaft zu schützen.
Ein Mitglied der Palme-Fahndungsgruppe gehört auch zum Verteidigungsschießverein. Und Hans Holmér, den Sozialdemokraten nahestehend, hat kein Problem mit rechtsradikalen Leibwächtern.
Hier in Borlänge, 200 Kilometer von Stockholm entfernt, will sich Hans Holmér in der Mordnacht aufgehalten haben. In diesem Hotel. Aber stimmt das? Der Rezeptionschefin haben die Fahnder 1990 einen Maulkorb verpasst. Der Journalist Sven Anér, der 5 Bücher über den Palme-Mord geschrieben hat, konnte noch mit ihr reden.
Ich bin im Herbst 87 hier gewesen, bei allen Hotels. Niemand hatte Hans Holmér als Gast. Im Frühjahr 88 habe ich von der Rezeptionschefin Mai Lundén, die hier drin im Hotel sitzt, den Bescheid bekommen, nein, er hat hier nicht gewohnt. Wir haben alle Hoteldokumente hervorgeholt, die es von dem Tag gibt. Kein Dokument spricht von Holmér.
Niemand hat Holmér gesehen. Um Teewasser zu holen, will Holmér um 7:35 Uhr am Morgen nach dem Mord aus seinem Zimmer zum Empfang gegangen sein. Dort erzählt ihm die Rezeptionistin vom Attentat, behauptet Holmér. Karl Nordlund arbeitet in der Nähe von Borlänge als Drucker. Aus Interesse hat er recherchiert.
Die Rezeptionistin, die in der Nacht arbeitete, heißt Reidun Andreasson. Die konnte ganz klar sagen, ich habe Hans Holmér nicht gesehen.
Auch die Teewassergeschichte kann nicht stimmen.
Man konnte Teewasser bestellen bis 7 Uhr. Aber nach 7 Uhr, als Hans Holmér hier gewesen sein will, da war der Frühstücksraum schon geöffnet. Da holt man das Wasser nicht mehr an der Rezeption.
Um Holmérs Borlänge Aufenthalt dennoch zu stützen, werden nachträglich Kopien von Hoteldokumenten vorgelegt. Aber sind sie wirklich echt? Auf dem Anmeldeformular fehlt der Ortsname Borlänge. Das Formular kann aus jedem anderen Hotel der Scandic-Kette stammen. Auf dem Eurocard-Abschnitt stehen die Initialen einer Hotelangestellten, die gar nicht im Dienst war. Und schließlich die Hotelrechnung, auch ohne Ortsnamen. Abreisetag statt des 1. März einen Tag zu früh, am 28.02., am Tag des Mordes.
Die Frage bleibt, wo war Hans Holmér in der Mordnacht? Im Stockholmer Polizeipräsidium sehen ihn Kollegen, als er bereits in Borlänge eingecheckt haben will. Und abends, nicht sehr weit vom Tatort, wundert sich ein hoher Polizeioffizier, warum Holmér ihn nicht zurückgrüßt. Und schließlich sein Fahrer, Rolf Dahlgren. Er hat Elitesoldaten als Fallschirmspringer ausgebildet und später als Polizeiinspektor die Spitzen aus der Politik und vom Geheimdienst SEPO chauffiert. Anfang Mai 1994 stirbt er. Seine Lebensgefährtin Lilian Feld war auch Polizistin. Sie erinnert sich genau, was Rolf Dahlgren über die Mordnacht erzählt hat.
Ja, das war nach
Ja, als Ulla Ankersbong, eine Juristin aus Göteborg, und ich Rolf besucht hatten, stellten wir ein paar Fragen zum Palme-Mord. Und da erzählte Rolf, dass er und Holmér 7 Minuten nach dem Mord am Tatort waren.
Auch Kommissar Söderström bestätigt die Aussage, dass Holmér 7 Minuten nach dem Mord am Tatort vorbeifährt.
Die Angaben der Frauen habe ich telefonisch bei Rolf Dahlgren nachgeprüft und er hat mir bestätigt, was die Frauen gesagt haben.
In Dahlgrens persönlichem Dienstplan ist die Eintragung vom Mordabend nachträglich gestrichen. Sogar das Wort Freitag ist übermalt, so als dürfte es diesen Tag nie gegeben haben.
Seine Fahndung hat Hans Holmér von Anfang an auf die Kurden konzentriert. Ein überzeugendes Motiv gibt es nicht, Belege auch nicht, aber Razzien und Festnahmen im großen Stil. Die notwendige Zustimmung der Staatsanwaltschaft kümmert ihn nicht. Seine Durchsuchungsbefehle schreibt er sich einfach selbst.
Holmérs Polizeikarriere war eng verknüpft mit der Sozialdemokratie und wäre unmöglich gewesen ohne die Unterstützung des innersten Parteikreises.
Die sozialdemokratische Spitze und der Sicherheitsapparat pflegten schon immer außergewöhnliche Beziehungen. Der neue Regierungschef Ingvar Carlsson stützt Holmér zunächst. Als die Kurdenspur nicht mehr zu halten ist, muss Holmér gehen. Von da an hat man sich auf den verrückten Einzeltäter festgelegt. Die Polizeispur war immer tabu.
Wer fürchtet eine intensive Untersuchung innerhalb des Sicherheitsapparates? Fast scheint es, als gäbe es eine allgemeine Furcht. Die Aufklärung des Palme-Mordes könnte die schwedische Gesellschaft in ihren Grundfesten erschüttern. Die Medien stellen auch keine Fragen. Eine Ausnahme machen dabei die Fernsehsendungen des Lars Borgnäs. Er hat sich intensiv mit der Palme-Fahndung beschäftigt. Warum ist die Polizeispur ein Tabu?
Ja, das ist eine schwierige Frage. Ich glaube, es gibt eine Tradition innerhalb der schwedischen Kriminalpublizistik, mit der Polizei zusammenzuarbeiten und nur zu berichten, was die Polizei macht. Es ist nicht üblich, die Polizei zu kritisieren.
So schweigen die Medien zur Polizeispur genauso wie die Politik.
Allein der frühere Finanzminister Kjell-Olof Feldt platzt ein einziges Mal in die große Stille. Im August 1995 fordert er, die Polizeispur ernst zu nehmen. Keine offizielle Reaktion, dafür aber andere Merkwürdigkeiten. In der folgenden Nacht turnen nämlich zwei Männer auf dem Dach der Ministerpräsidentenvilla herum. Direkt über dem Zimmer, in dem Regierungschef Ingvar Carlsson schläft. Zufall oder nicht? Damals gab es ein sehr spezielles Ausbildungsangebot für die Freizeit. Fassadenklettern an Hauswänden. Veranstaltet von einem, der Mitglied des Verteidigungsschießvereins, der Baseballliga und des Fitnessstudios in Uppland Väsby war. Zuständig für die Bewachung des Olof Palme-Nachfolgers ist der Geheimdienst Säpo. Doch ein privater Wachschutz bemerkt die Kletterer und alarmiert später die Polizei. Die Männer, die Carlsson so nahe kommen, werden zwar vorläufig festgenommen, ermittelt wird aber nicht. Einen politischen Hintergrund streitet die Polizei ab. Warum lässt die Säpo Carlsson so ungeschützt?
Nur 6 Stunden später eine eilig einberufene Pressekonferenz. Der Ministerpräsident kündigt überraschend seinen Rücktritt an, wie er sagt, aus persönlichen Gründen. Erst die Forderung, die Polizeispur ernst zu nehmen, dann die Männer über dem Schlafzimmer, jetzt der Rücktritt. Alles innerhalb weniger Stunden. Ein eventueller Zusammenhang wird von vornherein ausgeschlossen. Auch seine Nachfolge hat Carlsson noch nicht geregelt. Vor lauter Überstürzung informiert er seine Stellvertreterin Mona Sahlin erst am Morgen der Pressekonferenz. 1996 scheidet Ingvar Carlsson aus. Der neue Göran Persson, ebenfalls Sozialdemokrat, verfolgt einen Kurs, der noch weiter weg ist von Palme als der des Ingvar Carlsson.
Jag vill tacka livet som gett mig sång. Det gav mig 2 ögon och när jag dem
Im Juni 1999 wird ein Bericht fertig, an dem eine angeblich unabhängige Kommission jahrelang gearbeitet hat. Aufgabe war, auch die Polizeispur von allen Seiten auszuleuchten, mit den besten Analytikern des Landes. Herausgekommen ist am Ende nichts. Die Versäumnisse der Palme-Fahnder nicht aufgearbeitet, die Polizeispur nicht analysiert. Kein Polizeispurzeuge neu befragt, aber alle für unglaubwürdig erklärt. Kein Polizist neu befragt, aber allen pauschal Glaubwürdigkeit bescheinigt. Ein wenig überraschendes Ergebnis. Die Polizei selbst hatte die Untersuchungsakten ausgewählt und die Kommission beraten. Der Bericht liegt jetzt im Justizministerium und das sieht keinen Handlungsbedarf. 2011. In 10 Jahren ist der Mord an Olof Palme verjährt. Die Polizeispur bleibt die Spur, die nicht sein darf.
Och mina sånger som era sånger och alla sånger.
Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme and his wife Lisbeth leaves Grand Cinema and start on their way home. At the cross-section of David Baker Street and Tunnel Street, a man stands in front of the shop, Die Karima. When the Palme couple passes him, he pulls out a gun from his pocket and walks right behind them. He disengages the safety pin, puts his left arm on Olof Palme's shoulder, causing the Prime Minister to stop and start to turn around. He aims his gun at Olof Palme's spine and pulls the trigger. Palme falls down while the man fires another shot. This shot misses and only grazes Lisbeth Palme. When the Prime Minister hits the pavement, the shooter stops. He looks at Olof Palme for a couple of seconds, making sure that the shot was fatal. The Prime Minister of Sweden is dead. The murderer then puts the safety pin back on, holsters his gun in his pocket and starts to run. He runs up these 89 steps and disappears. We are going to take a look at the so-called police trail. It is a trail that leads into, not only the police and the Palme investigation, but into the extreme right-wing police, within the police district of Norrmalm in Stockholm. It leads into the military, into Sweden's security police, SAPO, and it leads to South Africa. It's a trail that has its origin long before the murder, and it's a trail that has never been investigated. This is the police trail. On October 27, 1981, a Soviet submarine ran aground, off Karlskrona in Sweden, close to a Swedish military installation. The Swedish government decided not to take the stranded submarine with military force, something the Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, years later confirmed was a wise choice, because the Soviet Union would have responded militarily to something like that. On the 5th of November, 8 days after it went aground, the submarine gets dragged off and is returned to the Soviet Union. It had been a very embarrassing incident, not only for the Soviet Union who got caught with their pants down, but also for Sweden who obviously didn't have the capability to stop foreign submarines from lurking in Swedish waters, close to military installations. In the years between 1982 and 1986, there were many, so-called submarine incidences, without the Swedish military being able to capture or stop any of these, and this was the breeding ground for great dissatisfaction within the Swedish military, who felt that Olof Palme did not take these incursions seriously. Some of these submarine incursions were probably the Swedish army chasing ghosts, but some of them were probably real too. It was automatically assumed that it must be the Soviet Union doing this. But, would the Soviet Union, after being humiliated in front of the entire world, be so stupid, or so bold, to continue this, knowing that the Swedish military was on their highest alert and was throwing everything they had at this? Or, were some of these incursions done by NATO submarines, in order to put pressure on the Swedish Prime Minister, to have a tougher line towards the Soviet Union? And knowing that more and more Swedes would favor a Swedish NATO membership, if the Swedes felt threatened by Soviet submarines? It went so far that Hans von Hofsen, one of the top generals in Sweden, in December 1985, wrote an article in one of Sweden's biggest newspapers, entitled The Soviet Republic of Sweden, in which he accused the Swedish Prime Minister of being too soft on the leaders of the Kremlin. He was a short time later, supported by 12 other generals in another newspaper article. When Palme was asked about this by the media, he reprimanded the generals, live on television, for everyone to see. The officers, K. Holmberg and Christer Widgren, admitted that Olof Palme was seen as a threat and a security risk among the highest officers in the country. Hans von Hofsen went so far to even call the Prime Minister a traitor. Hans von Hofsen told K. Holmberg that he in 1983 or 84 had attended meetings with Swedish police in Stockholm. Here von Hofsen hold a lecture and they discussed if they could trust Palme and if there was a way to get rid of the Prime Minister. Many of the people that went to these meetings were a group of policemen from the police district of Norrmalm. At these meetings, with up to 40 people attending, there were held lectures about Soviet spies, infiltrations and submarine incursions. The people talking at these meetings were a mix of policemen on the politically extreme right and people from the military. Here they would also do Nazi salutes, clack their heels together, while chanting, "Let's get rid of Olof Palme." The leader of these meetings in Stockholm's Old Town was Policeman O. He had a strong interest in weapons and contacts in the military and was a close friend of Policeman D. He was also the policeman that called the police station 2 to 3 hours after the murder and expressed his joy that Olof Palme was dead. Many of the policemen attending these meetings came from the police district of Norrmalm and were members of the infamous baseball gang. So, why are there so many policemen at Norrmalm, with views on the extreme right? Well, people with extreme views tend to find each other and they also tend to clutch together. And obviously, a police chief with extreme political views will preferably hire a policeman that he knows has the same political views as him, over a different candidate that has different political views. They were called the baseball gang because they liked to wear baseball caps and civilian clothes at work. This unit was founded in 1982 to limit street and drug crimes. But this was done so brutally that the group was theoretically disbanded only 1 year later. But in reality, the police and the baseball gang worked together, up until the murder of Olof Palme. The most infamous episode that they were involved in was the so-called Mocknow case from 1982, where an addict died under mysterious circumstances in a room at a subway station in Stockholm. According to the hospital staff, the man had typical beating marks, including a broken spleen, but it could never be proven that he was beaten to death. Both the police board and the court decided not to hold the 2 police officers, policemen G and A, responsible for the death. The extremely right-wing baseball gang had a fanatical hatred towards the left-wing Prime Minister Olof Palme. This was a group that was described by colleagues like Gore and Storm as a strong and tight group. Outsiders did not have access to their meetings or the group. The creator of the baseball gang was none other than Hans Holmer, the first chief investigator of the Palme murder. Not only did these policemen have strong Nazi sympathies, they were heavily interested in weapons, and had connections to the military. Many were Homeland Reserve officers, security instructors, and shooting instructors. Some of these policemen formed a shooting club in the beginning of the 80s where they had regular shooting practices. The police officers D, G, and O belonged to this club, together with friends from the military. These policemen are among those we are going to take a closer look at, along with the odd behavior of police units 3230 and 1520, which happened to be near, or around the murder scene, before, during and after the murder. These 2 police units were also 2 of the first police units to arrive at the murder scene, more than 6 minutes after the murder had happened, and after the alarm calls had been botched for 4 to 5 minutes. Police Unit 3230. The policemen D, H, and G belong to Police Unit 3230, and they are only 150 meters away from the murder scene when the fatal shots are fired. But, apparently the policemen do not hear the shots, even though they are so very close, and are highly trained in weapons use. They are the first police unit to arrive at the murder scene, several minutes after the ambulance has arrived. They are also in the murderer's flight path, but leaves 30 to 60 seconds before the murderer runs past the very spot they have just been in. When policeman D sees Olof Palme dead on the ground, he throws up. Police Unit 1520 arrives at the murder scene, as the 3rd police unit to arrive there. This unit is seen by the witness, Ingrid, 11 minutes before the murder, but there is only one police officer in the car and he is talking into a walkie-talkie, not a police radio. The police unit is only 300 meters west of the Cinema Grand, when the Palme couple was leaving the cinema and starting on their way home. Ingrid can hear the officer say, "Oh, that way," before he slams the door shut and drives away at a high speed. Police Unit 1520 is also in the flight path of the murderer, just 1 to 1.5 minutes after the murderer has passed there. Behaves oddly, and does not stop the witness Lars, who comes running past them while chasing the murderer. They claim to be looking for the murderer, even though there has been no alarm over the police radio at that time, and the only people who know about this, at this time, are the witnesses at the murder scene. They do not sound the alarm, nor give chase after the murderer, when the witness Lars tells them which way he escaped. Instead, they talk to Lars for several minutes, before they take him back to the murder scene to take his statement. A few months before the murder, another thing happened that made Palme's enemies even more suspicious of him. If Sweden suddenly was invaded, the Swedish Civil Defense Force and the Swedish police would take the first blow and then be part of the Swedish defense. But now this was going to change. The 28th of November, 3 months to the day before the murder, a new law proposal was introduced. This said that after the first blow, the police would not fight the invaders, but function as normal police and keep order. This law proposal was removed after Palme's death, but when it was proposed, it woke a lot of strong feelings among the police and people in the Civil Defense Force. The top general of the Civil Defense Force at the time, Lennart Nilsson, was interviewed by Swedish TV.
Så här skulle genom ett lagförslag polisen plötsligt riskera att bli förrädare i en krissituation.
Kan man säga. Men nu kom det aldrig så långt.
Det genomfördes aldrig?
Nej, och jag vet inte varifrån det kom. Det vet inte jag.
Det kommer från regeringen och Palme.
Ja, det måste jag ha gjort.
Men varför la han fram ett sånt förslag?
Jag har ingen aning. Vi kan inte fråga honom heller.
There is no doubt that Olof Palme was a controversial prime minister, not only with his political opponents, but also within his own political party. And there had been attempts to remove him as leader of the party, but these had failed. The reason for this was that he was considered by many to be too far to the political left. In the middle of the Cold War, he was talking about friendly relationships with the Soviets, and with Ronald Reagan and George Bush in the White House, along with many of those who are called the neo-conservatives. This was not seen favorably by the Americans, nor by the Swedish extreme political right. To them, Prime Minister Olof Palme was a communist and a traitor. In March 1985, the Soviet leader, Konstantin Chernenko, died, and Prime Minister Olof Palme is present at the funeral. The new Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, wants to talk to Palme while he is there, but because of the frozen relationship between the two countries, Palme said this is not possible. But, later that year, Palme starts to plan a new trip to Moscow, to talk to the new Soviet leader, who had started to use words like glasnost and perestroika. At the beginning of 1986, there was unrest among the far-right groups in Sweden, among certain military and within Norrmalm police districts ahead of Palme's visit to the Soviet Union. They feared that the Prime Minister would come to some kind of agreement with the Soviets. To them, the clock was ticking. On January 16th, several policemen met at Norrmalm police station. A policeman, who had previously worked for the Secret Military Intelligence Service, IB, brought with him a friend from the military, Bertil, who also had a background in intelligence. Bertil discovered that the police officers seemed to know that something was going to happen to Palme in connection with his trip to Moscow. Either they knew that something was going to happen, or they were planning something. Bertil went in shock to the Social Democratic Municipal Council and told what he had heard.
Man har fått
haft klart för sig alltså att Olof Palme var en förrädare mot landet. Och jag håller alltså inte för uteslutet att Olof Palme mördades utav patriotiska skäl.
The man he told it to thought it was so unbelievable that he did not take him seriously. A year later, he writes a memo to the local Säpo boss in Norrköping, who sends it on to Säpo in Stockholm, where the PM disappears. Gro Brundtland, former Norwegian Prime Minister, talked to Palme just before he was murdered, and he told her that there was a group that seemed to be following him, and got in everywhere he was, and he felt very uneasy about this.
Vi snakket om ting som skjedde i Sverige, med folk som både fra andre land og i Sverige, som han så på forskjellige møter, hvor han talte, kjente igjen de samme ansiktene, og hadde en viss uro over hva var det som egentlig foregikk. Så det var jo mange slike.
Så Olof det at han kjente en oro?
Vi snakket om det fordi det var noe som kalte seg sosialdemokrater, som var med utgangspunkt i USA.
IAP.
Ja, det var det som vi snakket om, og så fortalte han ting som skremte meg, og som jeg skjønte at han egentlig var litt urolig over. Det har jeg jo tenkt mye på.
This group was called EAP, an extreme right-wing group that was extremely anti-Palme. Anders Larsson has heard that Palme is going to be killed. He has friends in the ultra-right-wing magazine Contra, and has many contacts in the extremist milieu. A good friend who is an antiquarian tells him this. He is also part of the right-wing milieu, and he is in the leadership of the new Swedish movement. He has heard from contacts in the Swedish security police, Säpo, that they intend to shoot Olof Palme in connection with, or before he goes to Moscow. Larsson feels as if the man wants him to warn in some way. A few days later he goes to warn Palme. He goes to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, at Rosenbad, and delivers a note that says, Olof Palme dead. His warning goes on to Säpo, where it is sorted out. Säpo does nothing about this warning, neither before nor after the murder. The 21st of February, 1 week before the murder, there was a conference in Sweden about ANC and the apartheid regime in South Africa, where Palme was giving a speech. The ANC participants at this meeting had been targeted with several assassination attempts in different countries in Europe, carried out by the South African Intelligence Service. They had done this with the help of the dreaded South African hit squad, C10, and also with the help of local national groups. Were there South African agents left in Stockholm after this conference? Olof Palme had been one of the strongest critics of the apartheid regime. Did they stay in Stockholm and target the Swedish Prime Minister? Lisbeth Palme notices two men on the street in the morning. She considers calling Säpo, but changes her mind. When the murder takes place, she immediately thinks of the men. In the evening, the Palme couple is at a restaurant. A man enters the restaurant and looks around, and Lisbeth gets suspicious about his odd behavior. There are several observations of people who seem to be following, and/or monitoring the Palme couple. In Norway, a man receives a phone call from a man who is a member of EAP's sister organization, the Schiller Institute. The Norwegian understands that the Swede has called the wrong person, but he would not stop talking about Olof Palme.
Disse menneskene må bort, de må elimineres, men det verste av alle er Palme. Han må bort først. Han må elimineres, og det må skje genast. Noen har en jobb å gjøre. Og dette gjentok han. Det var som en besettelse. Han gjentok det gang på gang.
After the murder, the man reports to the Norwegian security police about the call. They pass this information on to Swedish Säpo, but this information also disappears from Säpo's archives. Bjorn has a military background and has also served as a UN peacekeeper. He was involved in the 80s in anti-communist circles, where hatred of Palme was strong. He says that if his identity was to be known, his life would be in danger, but he wants to tell what he knows. Bjorn was part of a secret defense group that was to be the last defense, if there was an invasion, called Stay Behind. The members there were to have military background, former special forces soldiers and reserve officers. But they had to be anti-communists. Many of the members also had a police background. He says, they had a lot of weapons and technical equipment, also unregistered, that could not be traced. They collected information about people they deemed unreliable, people they considered as a security risk. There could be phone surveillance, but also room surveillance. They shared the information informally with Säpo, and some of this also went abroad. The hatred of Palme was strong. I know that at times they monitored the Palme couple, but also other politicians. Each group consisted of 4 to 7 people, and they were very well equipped. According to a Swedish journalist, one of his contacts had told him that, the day before the murder, there was a meeting between 5 policemen and a military security expert in an apartment at Söder, in Stockholm, where the weapon that was to be used in the assassination was discussed. All of the participants of the meeting were named, but this was also never followed up by Säpo or the Palme investigators. We see a pattern from Säpo and the Palme investigators start to form. At lunchtime, Prime Minister Olof Palme comes to Rosenbad and tells his bodyguards that he doesn't need them anymore that evening or more this weekend. At around the same time, policeman O, against the doctor's recommendation, a week after an appendix operation, leaves the hospital on his own initiative. Police officer O is a weapons expert and Nazi sympathizer. His Nazi interests were well known within the police. There were several tips about him after the murder. Some of them came from his police colleagues. He is a close friend of policeman A and D, and also businessman and arms dealer together with policeman A. He has no alibi for the night of the murder. O has access to an apartment at the intersection of Regering Street and David Beguer Street. Only 30 meters from where the pursuer Lars loses sight of Olof Palme's murderer later that night. In 1988, the apartment that he and policeman A both has access to, was raided by police on charges of arms smuggling. In the apartment the police found lots of weapons and ammunition, but also bullets that were the same type of bullet that Olof Palme was shot with. Bullets that were designed to penetrate bulletproof vests. They also found maps over the Swedish phone company's cable network in Stockholm, including where the Prime Minister's phone lines could be found. At 3 o'clock, Lisbeth tells a friend that she and Olof are planning to go to the cinema that night. But the Palme investigators have always said that no one knew that the Palme couple was going to the cinema that evening. But Olof and Lisbeth Palme clearly knew this themselves. His bodyguards knew it. No one knows who else they might have told it to. 6 hours before the murder, a radio broadcast is sent out on the radio, with 3 people as participants, who are connected to the extreme right wing in Swedish politics. The program plays a scene from a play about the murder of King Gustav III, the Swedish king who were assassinated almost 200 years earlier. Policeman H, that belongs to Police Unit 3230, works at this radio station. A woman who listens to the program perceives that it is about the murder of a statesman, but not Gustav III. She contacts the police the next day, but this has never been followed up. At around 6 o'clock, Olof Palme talks to his son Morten on the phone. They agree to go to the cinema together at 9. Before I continue, I would like to explain for those who don't know, there are no mobile phones at this time. Well, there are, but they are the size of a small suitcase and not very suitable to do surveillance with. Walkie-talkies are also rare, at least among regular people, but walkie-talkies are at that time being used by police and the military. A walkie-talkie therefore is something that would very much stand out to normal people. And there are a lot of sightings of walkie-talkies around the route the Palme couple took. I will not mention every single one of these sightings, but I am going to talk about the most important ones. At 7:30, a group of people see a man standing near the entrance of the Palme residence, looking towards the entrance. This is reported to the Palme investigators, but no one follows this up. The same goes for that series of tips about men with walkie-talkies. None of these are followed up either. Swedish security police dismisses every sighting as uninteresting, even though there are more than 12 witnesses who report sightings of 8 different people either following and/or watching the Palme couple on their way to Grand Cinema. Several of these people are visibly carrying a walkie-talkie under their coat with the antenna sticking out. At 10:09 Olof Palme enters Grand Cinema. It's now less than 2.5 hours before Prime Minister Olof Palme will be assassinated. At 10:09, Olof Palme enters Grand Cinema. In less than 2.5 hours, the Prime Minister of Sweden will be assassinated. Passers-by later say that they have observed a man with a walkie-talkie on the street corner, just outside the cinema, looking in, when the Palme couple was entering. At around 10 p.m., the policeman D&G in Police Unit 3230 goes completely offline for almost an hour. All their electronic equipment is turned off. Where they were or what they did during this time, no one knows. They have never explained this. Policeman D is in Unit 3230 the night of the murder. He is a member of both the shooting club and the baseball gang, and he is only 150 meters away from the murder scene when Olof Palme is murdered, after just parking his private car. This is the last place the murderer is seen, crouching behind Policeman D's private car. He also has an apartment only 30 meters away from his parked car, which is on the opposite side of the street of the apartment that 2 of his police colleagues has. A soldier that had D as his shooting instructor told the investigators that when D saw a sign with Olof Palme on it, he was ordered to drive over it with his car. There came in tips about him from 3 of his police colleagues after the murder, and his Nazi sympathies were well known within the police. Policeman D and Police Unit 3230 is the first police unit at the murder scene, and when he sees Olof Palme dead on the ground, he throws up. His partner that night was Policeman G. He is a former professional soldier, intelligence expert and arms dealer with his close friend, Policeman O. Has an apartment directly opposite of Policeman D's apartment, 30 meters from the last sighting of the murderer. He has contacts in the American CIA and the Swedish weapons manufacturer, Bofors. He has contacts in South Africa, a country he visited several times, also shortly before the murder. Officer G and A have almost always worked together. In less than 2 years, the 2 was reported 70 times for brutal methods against civilians, but they were never convicted. Such as the time they interrogated the drug dealer, Rolf Mocknow, who died shortly after that. At 5 minutes past 11, the movie is over and the cinema is starting to empty. Morten, Olof and Lisbeth stand outside the cinema, next to a shop and talk for a few minutes. The lights in the shop are on, but when Olof looks inside through the window, the lights are suddenly turned off. Morten finds this strange, because he can't see anyone in the shop. A few meters away, he sees a man looking into a window where all the lights are turned off. Morten says goodbye to Olof and Lisbeth and they walk home in the opposite direction of where the Palme couple is headed. Morten sees that the man follows after his parents. At the same time, 300 meters west of them, a police car is parked on the sidewalk. Ingrid looks out the window when she hears something outside and she sees Police Unit 1520. She is a designer, and therefore has a mind for details, and she notices the number on the police unit, and that it has a lot of electronic equipment in the back of the car. She wonders why there is only 1 police officer in the car, not 2, which is normal. The police officer does not use the police radio, but talks into a walkie-talkie. She can't hear what is said on the other side of the walkie-talkie, but she can hear the policeman sitting there say, "Oh, that way." The policeman then quickly slams the door shut and drives away at high speed. On duty in Police Unit 1520 that evening was Officer S and P. According to the action plan, S and P had no service that night. But Policeman P changed that for that evening. Policeman S has already worked all day at the police station and he will after this evening's shift had 21 hours of uninterrupted service. This police car is in what was the murderer's flight path, 1 to 2 minutes after the murderer has passed, even though the alarm hasn't gone out yet. At the same time as the Palme couple is walking down Svea Street, Policeman D moves his private car and is driving parallel with them, on a neighboring street. At 17 minutes past 11, John and his girlfriend walks down Adolf Fredriks Kirko Street in the direction of Svea Street. Only 100 meters from the spot where Olof Palme will be murdered in a few moments, John sees a man with a walkie-talkie. He recognizes him, it's Policeman A. Police Officer A is a close friend and business colleague of Policeman O. 6 weeks before the murder, he becomes the head of security for all radio traffic in the Greater Stockholm area, and thus also controls all walkie-talkie communication, also on the day of the murder. Sapo classified him as extremely reliable for this high management position. He is also seen by 3 different witnesses, and all say he had a walkie-talkie under his jacket. Boarded a bus shortly after the murder, not far from the murder scene, he is together with Policeman N and has a dark handbag in his hand, similar to the one the murderer was observed with during his escape. 1 week after the murder, Policeman A goes on sick leave and resigns a week later, after only 7 weeks as head of security for radio traffic in Stockholm. His successor will be Policeman O, who also is classified as extremely reliable by Sapo. Policeman A seems to suddenly have come into a lot of money, because shortly after this, he becomes an arms dealer and sells weapons and communication equipment to the Palme investigator, Hans Holmer, for over 1 million Swedish kroners. The apartment that A and O share together is later searched by the police, when Policeman A is charged with weapon smuggling. When the police search the apartment, they find an arsenal of weapons. They also find Nazi SS helmets and electronic equipment for surveillance, and they find bullets that are the same type as the bullet that killed Olof Palme. At 18 minutes past 11, the Palme couple now crosses the street, so Lisbeth can look into a shopping window on the other side. At the same time, Katja and Perjo have reached Svea Street after watching a movie at a different cinema. They don't have a watch, and in order not to miss their commuter train they need to find out what the time is. In front of the paint shop De Karima, this is exactly where the assassination soon will take place. They see a man with lowered arms. Katja knows the man. This is Police Officer F, a man from Finland. She has seen him many times at the gym she goes to. Katja speaks to him in Finnish, asking what the time is, but F doesn't answer. He looks nervously at Katja. She gets confused, grabs P's jacket and asks once again what the time is. At the same moment, a voice comes out of a walkie-talkie that P has hidden under his jacket. The voice says in Finnish, "They are coming." P answers in Finnish, "I have been recognized, what should I do?" The answer, "Screw that, do what you are supposed to do." Katja and Perjo get scared. They also see a pistol that F has in his left hand, indicating he is left-handed, something the murderer wasn't. Police Officer F works at the National Criminal Investigation Department. In other words, he works at the same department to which the entire Palme group soon belongs to. The 2 women turn around and move quickly in the direction of the central station. Shortly after, they hear 2 shots. Many people believe this man is the murderer, but it is not, because the description of the man's clothes does not match the clothes of the murderer. This man, Officer P, crosses the street, after the Finnish women have run away, and is seen by another witness, walking away, right after the murder, talking into a walkie-talkie. 20 minutes past 11, Policeman D in Police Unit 3230, now parks his private car at David Baker Street, in what will very soon become the killer's escape route. Policeman D says he moved his car because it was wrongly parked and he had gotten many parking tickets that year. But journalists Lars Borns and Thomas Bresky, at Swedish television, checked his claim. They found that he hadn't gotten any parking tickets the last year, and his car was already wrongly parked, so why move, and then wrongly park it again? Policeman D's private car is removed by a towing company a few days later, and he uses more than a month to get his car back from the impound company. At 21 minutes past 11, the Palme couple passes a man standing in front of the paint shop de Carima. When they have passed him, he takes out his gun, disengages the safety pin, puts his left arm on the shoulder of Olof Palme, points the gun at the Prime Minister's spine, and pulls the trigger. Olof Palme falls down while the man fires another shot. This bullet misses Olof Palme and only stray Lisbeth. The assassin now stops. He looks at Olof Palme for a few moments, making sure the bullet was fatal. Prime Minister Olof Palme is dead. The murderer then puts the gun's safety pin back on, he pockets the gun, and starts to run away. All the witnesses reported that the man had no problem running. He does not have a limp as Christer Pettersson so obviously had, but climbs the 89 stairs quickly and with ease. The action by the murderer is professional. It reveals a man that has long training with guns, probably military or police training. This is not the actions of an alcoholic drunk who spends his time drinking with his alcoholic friends in the park, like Christer Pettersson. Over a dozen witnesses say that when the murderer fled the scene, his steps were quick and agile. But the Palme investigators had a different opinion about the murderer's action, and write something completely different in their profile of the murderer. They describe the fact that the murderer secures his weapon and holsters it, as well-trained weapons people do, as a weird lack of professionalism, because he could have needed the weapon during his flight from the scene. And the fact that he didn't fire more shots at Lisbeth Palme. They actually described the murder as chaotic. When Swedish TV asked FBI expert Ray Pierce, with over 500 murder investigations behind him, he described the murder as follows. The crime was very quick, it was no hesitation, and he then rapidly fled the scene. It was a very controlled environment and he fled into a place where he knew where he was going. He was also comfy enough to know he was not in any immediate danger. The bullet that killed Palme was also unusual. It had a copper coating. Bullets like that are used if you want to penetrate a car door or a bulletproof vest. And the chief investigator Hans Holmer, at one of the first press meetings, admitted that this was an assassination by a professional hitman. At 22 minutes past 11, the murderer has started his escape up the 89 steps and towards Police Unit 3230. According to Policeman D, this is when he opens a can of cola and they drive away. The policeman in 3230 later admit that if they had been there 30 to 60 seconds longer, they would have been right in the path of the fleeing murderer. They claim not to have heard the shots, even though they are highly trained in weapons use and are so very close when the shots are fired. D says he went into the police car and shut the door, and that's why they didn't hear the shots. The murderer now stops at the top of the stairs for a short moment and looks down at the murder scene, before he continues his escape down David Baker Street. Leif stands with his car at the red light at the intersection of Svea Street and Tunnel Street, when he suddenly witnesses the deadly shots. At 22 past 11, he tries to alert the police on his mobile phone. The call is registered with the phone company, but no one answers at the police center. This happens to all the people who are trying to alert the police right after the murder. The police in the Swedish capital cannot be alerted. This only becomes possible 5 minutes later, and this gives the murderer precious time to escape. At 11:23, the murderer runs past Anna and her friend, who both notices that he is trying to put something in a small, dark handbag, but he seems to have a problem with the zipper. Lars, another witness, pursues the killer and is not very far behind. When he reaches David Beguer Street, the street is empty of people. But Police Unit 1520 drives past him slowly, without any police sirens or lights. They don't try to stop him and he continues running after the murderer. Lars then sees the murderer crouch behind the car policeman D parked there, only 2 minutes earlier, but Lars loses track of him and turns back. He then meets Police Unit 1520 again. They do not stop him this time either, and he is the one who has to make contact with them, and asks if they are looking for the murderer too. They confirm this, but this creates a problem for Hans Holmer and the Palme investigators, because the police alarm has not gone out yet, only the people at the murder scene and Lars knows what has happened. So what does the policeman in Unit 1520 do with this very important witness observation? Do they throw themselves over the police radio and sound the alarm and tell which way the murderer is headed? Do they quickly give chase after him to try to apprehend him? No. Instead, they drive Lars back to the murder scene to take his statement, becoming the third police unit to arrive at the murder scene. But Lars' statement is never followed up. At the same time, the witness Magnus Prim sees a man that matches the description of the man that Katja and Perjo saw a few minutes earlier. He is walking away fast from the murder scene and is talking into a walkie-talkie that he has on the inside of his coat, like Magnus Prim demonstrates here. At 11:24, a press photographer, Ake Malmström, over his police receiver, hears a walkie-talkie conversation. "Hello there, is everything okay? I'm good, but it's very cold. The Prime Minister has been shot." The last sentence sounds happy, not appalled or shocked, it sounded like it was a done deal. At 26 minutes past 11, 500 meters east of the murder scene, a bus enters the stop at Eriksberg Street. Two men want to get on the bus, they seem excited. One of them gets on, the other stops at the bus door and hesitates. He then looks up at the ceiling, writes down the bus identification number, and then gets out. In his hand he has a dark handbag with a zipper. This is policeman Anna. Anna and her friend had seen such a bag with the fleeing murderer 4 minutes earlier. This was how Stockholm's police carry their firearms in service at that time, in a dark handbag, just like the one this man has. His behavior is noted not only by the bus driver, but also by two passengers on the bus, the TV producer Lars Krantz and Sarah. The bus driver and Sarah later get death threats and are not heard by the investigators until 8 years after the murder. At 26 minutes and 30 seconds past 11, the police alarm finally goes out, more than 5 minutes after the murder has happened, and several minutes after the ambulance has arrived. But the alarm doesn't go out to all the police units in all the districts in Stockholm, only the police units of a couple of districts are alerted. The rest of the Stockholm's police does not know what has happened until the national alarm goes out, 2.5 hours after the murder. In the meantime, most police in Stockholm are chasing petty criminals and are not looking for a murderer. So, who was responsible for first botching the alarm call for more than 5 minutes, and then not alerting all the police districts in Stockholm? It was Policeman H, who usually is with Police Unit 3230. But on this night, he has taken a shift at the Stockholm Alarm Central, a job that he normally doesn't do. Of the 10 operators at the Alarm Central, 8 operators handles petty crimes and 2 handle the more serious alarm calls, like robbery and murder. Officer H controls both these 2 lines in this police district, delaying the first alarm calls to the police, and making sure that only a couple of districts are alerted before the national alarm goes out, 2.5 hours later. Policeman H is one of the leaders of the extreme right-wing meetings that were held in Stockholm in the beginning of the 1980s, and also member of the right-wing radical group, Swiscia Avantis Guardia. He has photographs of himself, posing in front of Jewish graves, doing a Nazi salute. He also works at the extreme right-wing radio station, which aired a radio program about the murder of Gustav III, on the day of the murder of Olof Palme. A listener to the radio station perceived that they are talking about the murder of a statesman, but not Gustav III. After the murder, she contacts the Palme investigation about this, but this was never investigated. At 27 minutes past 11, police car 3230 now arrives, as the first police unit, at the murder scene. Shortly after policeman D sees the dead body of Olof Palme, he throws up. His explanation for this was that he had just opened a can of cola when the alarm call came, and he therefore had to drink the whole can, in one go, and that is, according to him, was what made him throw up, not the sight of the murdered Prime Minister. The policeman now starts their search, but even though more than a dozen witnesses has told the policeman that the murderer ran up the 89 stairs, they start a slow, door-to-door search, in the direction of, and around the stairs, giving the murderer even more precious time to escape. Shortly after this, Police Chief Gösta Södergren arrives, and this is the second police unit to arrive at the murder scene. He sees Hans Holmer in a civilian car, driving slowly past the murder scene. Södergren greets him and was very surprised when Holmer didn't greet him back. They have known each other for years and, according to Södergren, Hans Holmer clearly saw him. Hans Holmer's driver, Rolf Dahlgren, confirms this, and says that he and Holmer arrived at the murder scene, a few minutes after the murder. He was told to pass the murder scene slowly by Holmer, but not to stop. So who is Hans Holmer? He is the founder of the baseball gang, and a member of the shooting club. He is soon to be the first chief investigator of the Palme murder. He is not where he says he was the night of the murder. Because according to Hans Holmer, he was in a different town at the night of the murder. He says he was in Berlanga. Holmer claims he stayed at Hotel Scandic and presents a receipt from a hotel to confirm this. Journalist Sven Einer contacted the reception manager Maj London at Hotel Scandic and asks if Hans Holmer stayed at the hotel from February 28 to March 1, as he claims. Her answer is no, he did not stay there that night. The receipt Hans Holmer presents doesn't say which Scandic hotel he stayed at. It could have been any Scandic hotel in Sweden. Another problem with the receipt is that the date for Holmer's departure and payment is 28th of February, the day of the murder, not the next day, as Holmer claims is the day he checked out of the hotel. And the signature on the receipt is not from the woman that works at that Scandic hotel the 1st of March. Holmer's driver, Rolf Dahlgren, says that he drove Hans Holmer to different places around Stockholm the evening of the murder. When they arrived somewhere, Holmer would leave the car and enter another car where he talked to several people before returning, and they would drive to a new meeting place. According to him, this was what Hans Holmer did most of that evening. This is Rolf Dahlgren's working sheet for that week. He has tried to scratch out the time he worked on that Friday, the day of the murder, like this day had never existed. Around 29 minutes past 11, police car 1520 arrives at the murder scene with the witness Lars. They are the third police car to arrive there. They join the search before, finally going up the 89 steps. Shortly after they have reached the top of the stairs, the policemen give up the hunt, and walk down the stairs and back to the murder scene. Everybody, except policeman D, he is now left alone, for about 2 minutes on the street, by his private car, where the murderer last was seen, before he walks down the stairs again. It's first at 2:05 a.m. that the national alarm goes out. Only then was the surveillance extended at Stockholm's exits and deployed at the central station. By then, 2 trains had already left for Norway and Denmark, and 2 passenger ships had left for Finland. All escape routes out of Stockholm are wide open for 2.5 hours after the murder. 2.5 hours after the murder, policeman A, calls into the police station at Norrmalm and expresses his joy that Olof Palme has been killed. The next day, several police officers at Norrmalm's police district celebrate Palme's murder with cake, champagne, and a toast at the police station. Hans Holmer was appointed as head of the murder investigation. He has never led a murder investigation before, but still he becomes the chief investigator of what has been described by many as the crime of the century in Sweden. He hires a team of bodyguards. Several of these bodyguards are police officers from the infamous baseball gang that Holmer had started a few years earlier. He gets installed bullet-proof windows at his office, and he also buys weapons and electronic equipment from policeman A for over 1 million Swedish crowns. And this must be the first time in Scandinavian history that a police investigator has his own team of bodyguards, and also feels the need to have automatic weapons, which are illegal in Sweden. The TV producer Lars Krantz has been a journalist and a trained crime reporter for over 30 years. He recognizes policeman A in court, a few weeks after the murder, as the man who got on the bus he was on right after the murder. When Lars Krantz meets the chief investigator Hans Holmer the same evening, Krantz tells about his observation and shows a newspaper picture of policeman A. When one of Holmer's bodyguards asks who it is, Holmer stands up with the words, "A colleague," and then quickly walks away. Hans Holmer focuses his investigation on the Kurdish rebel group PKK, that doesn't have a motive to murder Olof Palme and has more than enough with their guerrilla war with Turkey. He makes a lot of arrests and interrogations, but he doesn't bother to get a warrant from a judge. He signs all the arrest documents himself, which make the legality of his raids and arrests dubious at best. After chasing the Kurdish group PKK for 2 years without any results, Hans Holmer is forced to resign as chief investigator and is replaced by Hans Alvebro. Alvebro soon changes the focus of the investigation to an alcoholic drunk, Christer Pettersson. In June 1994, after 6 years as the chief investigator, Hans Alvebro was charged with inactivity. He was not looking for any other suspects than Pettersson, even though Pettersson had been acquitted by the Supreme Court. However, the responsible public prosecutor did not open a trial against Alvebro, as he deemed he had questioned all the witnesses. Alvebro has said many times that they had found the murderer. It was Christer Pettersson. Alf Andersson, investigator within the Palme Group, wanted to investigate the clues that led into the police, but were rejected by Hans Overbro. He describes a frustrating work environment under Overbro's leadership and confirms that there were no serious attempts to investigate any other possible perpetrators than Pettersson. Hans Overbro was the chief investigator of the Palme assassination for 9 years. Almost 3 years after the murder, Christer Pettersson is pointed out at a police lineup by Lisbeth Palme. So why did Lisbeth Palme point her finger at Christer Pettersson when she said, right after the murder, that she didn't see the murderer's face? Elizabeth Loftus is an American professor in psychology and an expert on police lineups.
As I examine all the factors in this situation, there are a lot of problems connected with the memory. There would be problems for anybody being accurate in this situation. And the most important factor, in my opinion, in this case, is that it's almost 3 years until the lineup. And there is pretty good evidence in the literature that a brief look at somebody's face and then 3 years later attempting to make an identification, that it would not be very reliable.
It's only 6 to 8 weeks after the murder that Lisbeth Palme starts to remember a face, after a sketch of the supposed murderer has been published in all of Sweden's newspapers. She was also told in advance that the suspect was an alcoholic, and that her son Morten already had pointed the suspect out. This was based on Morten's observation of a man outside the cinema after the movie was over. If this was the murderer, he would have to see which direction the Palme couple would go. Then run either past them or on the other side of the street, without the couple noticing him. Then cross the street when the Palme couple did the same, wait outside Die Carema and kill the Prime Minister. At the very start of the lineup, Lisbeth Palme says, "It's not hard to see who the alcoholic is." Lisbeth Palme is also under huge pressure to identify the man her son already has identified, and of course she wants to help to find her husband's murderer. And this is the only thing that supposedly ties Christer Pettersson to the murder, this botched lineup, happening almost 3 years after the assassination. Some of the extreme right-wing policemen at Norrmalm Police District had ties to South Africa and the apartheid regime, and policeman G had visited the country only a short time before the murder. So did some of the intelligence people at SAPO. They had contacts within South African intelligence and the dreaded South African hit squad, C10. Eugene de Kock was the commanding officer of C10, and went under the nickname, Prime Evil. One of the C10 members claimed in an interview that Eugene de Kock had been in over 300 skirmishes, not only in South Africa, but also in other African countries. He had a violent temper and under his leadership, C10 became a death squad and a counterinsurgency unit that kidnapped, tortured, and murdered numerous anti-apartheid activists from the 1980s to the early 1990s. Dirk Coetzee is a former hitman and C10 operator.
We were defending the last white Christian outpost on the southern tip of Africa, and someone's got to do it. And my personality, as a lot of my ex-colleagues, fitted the personality of a guy that would do the job for the government.
The activities that I carried out were activities which were sanctioned military operations in which people died, yes.
I was the hit man in the need-to-know chain. There was other guys that decided which guys had to be hit. I was the hit man, like some generals were the poison man that supplied the poison. I was the spanner in that regard. In this canteen, Jean de Kock one night bashed an askari to death because he lost his firearm. And he killed the guy inside this canteen with a snooker cue. He's beaten him to death. The next morning it was blood all over. And then they took him away from here, badly beaten, and then pretended to the rest of the farm people, Askaris, that he's fled the country. He's left for Lusaka again.
In 1996, Eugene de Kock was tried and convicted on 89 charges and sentenced to 212 years in prison. After many years behind bars, de Kock confessed to 2 more murders in order to get a chance at parole. He was granted a parole in 2015. Klaus de Jonge, with the South African Institute in Amsterdam, says that Palme was seen as an enemy by the apartheid regime in South Africa. And that getting rid of him would be a good solution for the regime, as long as they were never implicated. So if they were a part of it, it would be through middlemen so that no trace could lead back to South Africa. They had the motive, and if they were interested they could get help from certain right-wing groups in Sweden. The apartheid regime in South Africa was actively operating covert intelligence and military operations in Europe in the 1980s, so-called black operations. In 1982, a bomb exploded at ANC's office in London, and the same year there were also several break-ins at their offices in England. In 1986, the Stockholm office of ANC was bombed, the same year Olof Palme was murdered. In 1987, a plot to kidnap the entire ANC leaderships was thwarted. 2 Norwegian mercenaries and an Englishman was arrested, but later let go without charges, something that led to the suspicion that it was because the suspects had claimed that British intelligence was involved in the plot. According to the chief editor of the British magazine Searchlight, Jerry Gable, who has written many articles about the South African black operations in Europe, there were at least 10 more people involved in the plot to kidnap the ANC leadership, all with military background. He also says that the South Africans worked closely with local groups and arrived a few days before the operation was to happen, to prepare. In 1988, the ANC representative in Brussels was targeted by an assassination plot, and a few months later the ANC representative in Paris, Dulcie September, was murdered. Responsible for all the covert intelligence and military operations in Europe by South Africa in the 80s was Craig Williamson. Eugene de Kock claims that Craig Williamson was involved in the murder of Olof Palme, and so does Dirk Coetzee.
I would like you to ask him about his involvement with the assassination of your Prime Minister, Olof Palme, because I can tell you a few stories. I can bring you some witnesses that can tell you a few stories about it. The South African security police was involved in that. And your Prime Minister was too liberal and too anti-South Africa and too pro-black and pro-African National Congress. That is why he died.
Do you have any kind of proof?
I've got a man that was involved with Craig Williamson in operations from 1984, undercover operations from his own mouth.
No, I mean, it's absurd, really. You know, I can't even comment on it. It's so stupid.
The journalist Lars Borns got a tip from a woman he found to be very credible. According to her, the assassin was a former elite soldier from Zimbabwe, named Anthony White. He has been a suspect in the assassination, but has denied that he was in Sweden at the time of the murder. But according to the witness, she had seen him at Säpo's headquarters a few days before the murder. He came walking together with 2 Swedish police officers, and they entered Säpo's secret elevator that goes down to the garage. She noticed him because he stood out among the other people. He spoke with a strange English accent, and she had never seen him at Säpo before, and wondered who he was, and what he was doing there. 10 years later, the woman saw Anthony White on television, and she contacted the Palme investigators. But she felt she wasn't taken seriously by the chief investigator Hans Overbro. He was cordial to her, but the questions he asked wasn't very investigative, and it quickly became clear that he wasn't interested in the information she had. The former C-10 operative Dirk Coetzee confirms the name of the assassin.
The actual chap that, according to the information, murdered your Prime Minister was an ex-Rhodesian, now Zimbabwe, Selous scout by the name of White, Anthony White.
Early in the Palme investigation, there was a tip about 3 South African commando agents that had come to Sweden in a camping car and was part of the Palme murder. One witness told the Palme investigators that Craig Williamson, who has been named as one of the organizers of the plot, was staying in one of EPA's apartments in Stockholm the night of the murder. But again, this was never investigated. When the ANC representative, Dulcie September, was executed, the South African journalist Jack Pauw was later told by the South African arms dealer, Dirk Stoffberg, how the assassination was done. According to Stoffberg, the security branch in South Africa was involved, and also 2 men from France, both former French foreign legionnaires, were hired to kill Dulcie September. So if South African intelligence also was involved in the murder of Olof Palme, how would they most likely do this? Jacques Pauw says that a group like this had to have help from a local intelligence service or a group that followed the Prime Minister. A team of people who would gather intelligence about Olof Palme. There would have been a logistics team that would have provided the gun and other necessary logistics, and then there would have been a team that monitored the assassination, very much like they did in the assassination of Dulcie September. There would certainly been people in Stockholm at the time that would have been close to, or in the vicinity of the assassination, and people that would have cleared and cleaned up after the operation was over. The former head of the Swedish Civil Defence Association, and journalist, Carl Gunnar Beck, received a phone call from a contact in England who says he knows the background of the murder of Prime Minister Olof Palme.
Substansen var det här alltså att upprinnelsen och konspirationen i Palmemordet hade sin källa i Sydafrika. Och den bestod av samtal mellan svenska affärsmän och sydafrikanska säkerhetstjänsten. Och dessutom med någon inblandad från svensk polisväsen. Observera inte svensk polis som helhet utan någon person inom den svenska polisorganisationen.
Du fick alltså intryck att det var en svensk Säpoman inblandad i konspirationen?
Det fick jag.
Beck gives this information to Säpo, but the tape where he is interviewed about this disappears. The operative leader of the Palme investigation at Säpo was Säpo's strongman, P.G. Ness. He also became responsible for checking that Säpo, did what they were supposed to do with the investigation. Investigating Säpo thus became a task for Säpo. They were now to investigate themselves. When PG Ness was asked for an interview by Swedish TV, his answer was this: "I miss seeing the necessity of this meeting." Sten Andersson, the Swedish foreign minister during Olof Palme's time as prime minister and one of his closest associates, got a tip about a group where high-ranking Säpo people were involved.
Det var alltså en grupp där några av medlemmarna var namngivna och som själva hade bestämt sig för att det var nödvändigt att hålla koll på Olof Palme och skaffa informationer. De ansåg alltså redan att han var en risk för, eller en hot mot Sveriges frihet. Och hur de exakt bedrev verksamheten, det vet jag inte. Men informationerna kommer från så pålitligt håll att jag inte hade den minsta anledning att misstro dem.
Fick du intrycket att den här gruppen inom Säpo såg Palme som landets fiende?
Ja. Han var på något sätt i deras ögon ond i sig och borde därför övervakas. De har naturligtvis inte det minsta skäl till att göra det. Inte det minsta. Och det är klart att om en Säpo-ledning skulle komma på den vansinniga idén att en sån här grupp skulle arbeta, så gör de det ju på ett sådant sätt så att ledningen inte själv syns, föreställer jag mig.
Den här informationsinhämtningen skedde ändå med hjälp av folk utanför Säpo?
Enligt uppgift, ja. Att det fanns människor och grupper i vårt land som ville röja Palme ur vägen, det är väl alldeles klart. Det är väl möjligt att en och annan fanns inom den här organisationen också. Om det, men att det fanns människor, det vet vi ju, som helst såg att Palme försvann, det är klart. Också med våldsamma metoder, det föreställer mig också. Det är ju oerhört svårt att komma åt det. Jag tänkte mycket på det då jag fick de här namnen uppgivna. Ska jag nu agera på ett speciellt sätt? Men hur gör man? Det är inte så lätt att komma åt en sån organisation. De kommer ju förneka allt och ledningen känner inte till den och de som till äventyrs är engagerade, de nekar.
Sten Andersson's contact confirms what he said to the journalist, and goes on to say that some of the members had access to the very latest technical equipment, including phone tapping, but also room surveillance. We know that there was surveillance around Olof Palme, in the weeks and months before the assassination, done by police officers on the extreme right from Norrmalm Police District. The controversy around the Prime Minister became stronger and stronger as the submarine incursions continued through the beginning of the 80s, even though many of these incursions probably were executed by NATO's submarines. The idea that they had to get rid of Olof Palme probably started with the meetings in Stockholm in the beginning of the 80s, where policemen and military leaders met and discussed the problem with Olof Palme. Just talks in the wind. But, also among some of the rich businessmen, intelligence people and military officers in Sweden. The businessmen know that they will lose everything if the Soviets invade, and the military and intelligence people that didn't think Palme was taking the submarine incursion seriously, was fuming. 3 months before the assassination, the controversial law that Olof Palme was proposing was introduced. This said that if Sweden was to be invaded, the police would no longer fight the invaders, but function as a normal police force and keep order. In other words, for these people, help the enemy. The editor of the extreme right-wing magazine, Contra, Christer Arkfors, explains what they were thinking about this.
Han pratade mycket om kärnvapenfri zon och så vidare. Saker och ting som i och för sig kan låta som ett brobyggande, men i själva verket var det saker och ting som föll Sovjetregimen på läppen. En kärnvapenfri zon kring Östersjön och så vidare vore ju mycket praktiskt för sovjetiska syften. Då hade man inga kärnvapen därifrån att befara om man skulle invadera Sverige. Uppträdde så vänligt gentemot Sovjet i sina uttalanden och i sitt handlande överhuvudtaget att det var inte långt ifrån en invit. Signalen som i Sovjetunionen bör ha gått fram var att vi vill inte direkt att ni kommer, men kommer ni så gör vi inte motstånd.
The Prime Minister was also soon going to the Soviet Union to meet with the new Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, where they feared that Olof Palme would strike some kind of deal with the Soviets. A Prime Minister who wanted to cooperate with the Soviet Union, and ordered the police to help a foreign invader. This was unprecedented. This sent shock waves through the corridors of power, along with Olof Palme's strong public reprimand of Hans von Hofsen and the 12 other generals. Like Caesar, the Prime Minister is surrounded by enemies, and everyone in the power structure knows this, and they fight back, their own way. When Palme in November 1985 announces his trip to Moscow in the spring, they don't have much time and they intensify their surveillance of the Prime Minister. According to journalist Al Olsen and his sources, the planning of the assassination started in November 1985. Many of these meetings were held in an apartment at Jott Street at Södermalm in Stockholm. Many of the people participating at these meetings were policemen and military, and belonged to the extreme right. Some of the key people at these meetings also have contact with South Africa, where Olof Palme is seen as a threat and an enemy. With a common cause with the extreme right in Sweden, the South Africans provide the hitmen for the assassination. And being foreigners, with no visible ties to Sweden, the assassin will be very hard to find for an investigation. The Swedes will handle the rest of the operation and provide the needed manpower, equipment and surveillance for the operation. They know that at the weekends, the Palme couple usually go out to a cinema, a theater show or dinner in Stockholm city centre, and that the Prime Minister usually doesn't have his protection with him during the weekends. They make a detailed plan on how the assassination is to be executed. 2 professional hitmen are needed to cover the potential routes the Palme couple may take on their way home. 4 or 5 more people with weapons are needed from Sweden, people that has local knowledge, with military or police training that can act as backup or as extra firepower if anything should go wrong with the assassination. They have 8 to 10 spotters, following the couple and reporting the movements over walkie-talkies. They control the police radio and know which frequencies are safe and are not used by the regular police in Stockholm. The necessary coordination of the assassination is done by 2 or 3 men. They are among the few people that know all the details of the assassination. The other participants only know what they need to know and what they are going to do. The money to pay the assassins and finance the operation is provided by the rich Swedish businessmen involved. They have put their own people in key positions, at the alarm center, ready to botch the alarm call for a few vital minutes and making sure that only a couple of the police districts, where they have their own people working, gets the alarm call. 2 or 3 police units with their own officers will be in and around the murder scene, making them able to control the environment around the streets where the assassination will take place. But also putting them in a position to be the first police units to arrive and thus control the search for the murderer in the vital first few minutes. They have their men at the phones where people can call in their tips the first few days, giving them the ability to sort which tips gets through to the investigators and which does not. As several people reported that when they called in with a tip about a police officer, they would get answers like, "That's a good friend of mine," or, "I work with that guy," scaring the people who called in. They also have their strongman Ness, that will be leading the Palme group at Säpo. Everything is set. A few days before the assassination, the 2 hitmen and Craig Williamson enter Sweden in a camping car and are briefed on how the operation is to be executed. The 28th of February, at around 9 p.m., they now know when and where the Prime Minister will leave the cinema. They meet in different places to make their last preparations. At around 11, the group gathers in the streets around Grand Cinema. At 10 past 11 the report goes out from the spotters to all, which way the Palme couple is headed. The assassins and the local backup men move into their positions. 10 minutes later, Prime Minister Olof Palme is shot in the spine and killed. The assassin, the backup men, and the spotters now leave for their pre-planned escape routes, while the message that the hit was successful goes out over the radio. After the assassination, a cleanup team disposes of all necessary things involved in the murder, and then make their pre-planned escapes. The investigation will be led by people they can trust, both at Säpo and at the police. There has been no vote, nothing is on paper, there is no one to blame. Because anyone involved in the plot has a plausible deniability, there are no compromising connections, except on the most secret points. But what is paramount for the plotters, is that it must succeed, no matter how much it costs, no matter how many people has to die, the perpetrators must be on the winning side, and never be subject to prosecutions of anything, by anyone. That is the overthrow of a democratically elected head of state. But, does it really matter who shot the deadly shot? The how and the who are just scenery for the public. Christer Pettersson, PKK, the Skandier man, it keeps people guessing, and most important of all, it keeps people from asking the real important questions. Why was Prime Minister Olof Palme killed? Who benefited? And who has the power to cover it up? The assassination of Prime Minister Olof Palme was a shock to all of Scandinavia. It changed Scandinavian security forever, it changed some of Olof Palme's most controversial policies, and it changed the Swedish relationship with the Soviet Union. The Palme murder has many similarities with the assassination of American President John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert in the 60s.